Welcome back, Reg audience. Today we're looking into the future. Not into like the future like next week or next quarter or anything, but the future in sort of like 3 to 5 years from now. And specifically, are your IT systems ready for the future? And what are you going to have to do to get there? There's going to be, it's quite exciting. It's a little bit of science fiction today. I mean, not really. I mean, it's not crazy, stupid stuff or anything like that. It's realistic, but it's interesting. So let's find out who's going to make it interesting. So we've got these two guys today. If we get locked in the studio, the future's not going to happen. So there you go. That's how much they know about the future. So first of all, from Intel, Chris, welcome.
No pressure, welcome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's high stakes on this. What do you do at Intel?
I work for our marketing group focused on data center and cloud solutions for European markets.
Okay, and this sort of thing, I mean, for Intel, you're always planning like sort of 10 years out and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Anyway. So you've actually just built the future, it's just in a lab at the moment.
We just haven't told you about it yet, that's right, yeah. Okay. It's waiting to be unveiled.
Yeah, it's a slightly creepy element of control about that, is
It should really go unmentioned. Right, excellent.
Yeah. And also from HP, Craig, welcome.
Good morning.
And same question, what do you do at HP?
So I'm the worldwide director for our consulting business, specifically in and around data center consulting. So I'll hopefully be the customer's voice in the room for those hundreds of projects we do around the world.
Mm-hmm. So you go into the data centers and say, well, you're going to have to rip that out. That's not good.
Yeah, exactly. And almost inevitably, we get involved in hundreds of programs. And and the good thing is I have a worldwide job, so I get to be able to talk about it from all regions' perspective as well. So I'm become a good aggregator of stuff that goes on.
Yeah, a lot of frequent flyer miles as well.
Yes, that as well. Yeah. All learned in economy, let me be clear about
it. Okay, and also flown in just today, the Dark Lord, welcome back.
I flew in late last night, but yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for
always good. You flew in anyway.
I flew in, yes.
So we're glad to have you here.
Always good to be here.
Yes. And this sort of stuff, you quite like this sort of stuff anyway. Because,
Absolutely.
I always complain that you live in the past, but you don't really.
I try to live in the past and the future, and occasionally the present.
Okay, so, well, let's see if you can pull that off. We're more interested in you in the present today. Now, remember, people, if you want to ask a question, use the little tab to ask a question. It comes up on my screen here, and then I ask it to the guys, and they give an answer. Don't complain that your questions weren't answered if you didn't ask them. So please do get involved and let us know if you agree or disagree what the guy's talking about. So first of all, though, we have Donald. You made the video. You're not on this video, are you?
I'm not voicing this video. No, it's giving some results that we got from the register audience very recently in a survey about where they are now, where they're going to. But when we did the original recording, voice quality wasn't quite there on the telephone linkage that Dale and I had. So then we got a substitute in because I was on a plane somewhere, and Helen's taken my stead, and she's asking the questions, Dale's responding.
Yeah, the quality was fine. It's your voice that's fine. So anyway, we've got the video. So Dale and Helen have put together the results of Freeform's look at the register audience and what you think about the challenges that are coming up. So if we could have a look at that video.
Hello, my name's Helen Vile.
And my name is Dale Vile.
And we're here today to talk about the results of a recent research study in which we asked the question, how future-proof are your IT systems? So Dale, to begin with, what do we mean by future-proof?
Yeah, fair question, because it is one of those terms that's bandied around by marketing people quite a bit. In this particular research, we had something very specific in mind. We were asking the question, how ready are your IT systems to handle the kind of things that are going to be thrown at it in terms of new and evolving business requirements over the next 3 years or so?
Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, there were 3 general areas we looked at. The first one was workforce related, where we looked at end user productivity. So what was going to be happening around sharing, collaboration, mobile, remote access, even BYOD, for instance. Then we explored specific applications and workloads. So in here we had things like big data, HPC, things like modeling and so on, but also next generation core transaction systems like ERP and CRM that are often forgotten about. And then the third area was concerned with externally facing applications. This is that hot discussion around digital transformation, digital business, business-to-business automation, and maybe even Internet of Things. So we weren't exhaustive, but I think we did pick up the major areas of concern when we think about how the demands on our IT infrastructures are going to evolve over time.
And how are people doing in these areas? How ready for the future are they?
Well, to be honest, it was a bit mixed. Some said they were fully ready, but they were in the minority. Most said they were only partway there or not very ready at all. Now on the surface that doesn't sound very good, but when you think about it, at least people are aware of where their gaps and shortcomings are, which is the first step towards actually doing something about it.
So in terms of specific elements in the IT infrastructure, are there any areas that stand out as being particularly weak?
Well, weak is probably too strong a word. Where there were shortcomings, what we heard was that what's in place is okay for now, but it will start to fall short as we go into the future. Having said that, there are some areas where the gaps are obviously bigger. Examples here include infrastructure and tooling in relation to cloud, desktop, mobile and security.
So standing back, why do you think we're seeing such a mixed picture?
Firstly, when new requirements come along, I think there's a tendency always to do the same as you have done in the past. What I mean by that is you extend existing systems or you just build new systems using the same kind of technology and techniques that you're familiar with. The danger there, though, is that you're using approaches that were designed to handle the problems of yesterday, not necessarily tomorrow. And then I think we need to acknowledge that some areas are just extremely dynamic and quite immature at the moment. If you've invested in some of those areas that I mentioned earlier, for example, cloud, big data, mobile and so on, the chances are that anything you put in place maybe a year ago or a couple of years ago is already showing its age compared to systems that are on the market today.
So it sounds like lack of readiness isn't necessarily a reflection of how well IT teams are doing their job.
No, you're absolutely right. When things are moving so quickly on both the business side and the technology side of the equation, it can be really hard to keep up.
But presumably there's some drivers you can't escape from, no matter how challenging things are.
Yes, you're right. What's clear is that the business has to constantly react to market dynamics and challenges, and this pressure cascades down, so IT has to in turn react to dynamics and challenges within the business. And this comes through really strongly in the research when we look at the drivers for modernising or strengthening your IT infrastructure. One theme at the top of the list is flexibility and responsiveness, and the other is efficiency and cost savings. And both of these themes come through strongly in relation to both IT and the business side of the house. In terms of more specific pressures, we then have things like evolving security and risk requirements, escalating availability and disaster recovery needs, and obviously regulatory pressure, which is pretty relentless in some markets.
So you've talked through some of the reactive drivers. Is there any evidence of organisations acting more proactively?
Well, there is some, in that we have a few organisations who said that the business innovation imperative, for instance, is pretty high on their list of drivers. And a few more talked about strategic business transformation. But the emphasis seems to be a desire to become more agile rather than necessarily to shape or predict the future, which I think is understandable. Who knows, for example, how customer behaviour is going to change over the next 3, 4, 5 years, or even employee expectations within the business. Against this background, people are clearly trying to get ready for change without necessarily knowing how that change is going to unfold. To put it another way, it's about making the infrastructure a lot more change-friendly.
So that sounds like a good objective, but what does that actually translate to in terms of specific areas of spend?
Well, we see a good level of focus on simply modernising the core hardware infrastructure. This is about replacing those old and inflexible boxes with more modern kit that's much more capable of handling virtualization and automation requirements. And this is very closely related to the next area of investment, which is around cloud and hosting. Yes, people are looking at public cloud options, but there's at least as much emphasis on private cloud and then hybrid cloud architecture and tooling to pull everything together. And you can only do this if you're building on a good foundation. What's interesting, though, is that relatively few have an emphasis on creating a fully integrated software-defined data center environment. This is clearly a direction of travel, but it's not necessarily pulled out as an explicit objective.
So we've covered quite a lot here, but how would you sum up what this research is telling us overall?
Well, obviously, the research is telling us that the IT infrastructure is subject to a lot of new and changing requirements, but that's hardly news. What is news is that IT teams are telling us that in order to meet those requirements, they need to start doing things differently in some areas. That may mean new hardware architectures, new software architectures, and maybe even whole new delivery models. Now, clearly transforming the whole of your IT delivery is a pretty big ask, and most organisations aren't going to be able to find the time or bandwidth to be able to deal with that. The trick is therefore to think in terms of doing lots of mini transformations. Whenever you're spending money to meet some kind of new business requirements, then make sure that what you're spending it on is taking you towards a more simple, efficient and flexible infrastructure, because that's what really matters into the future.
Well, that's a good thought to end on. Thanks, Dale.
Thank you.
Welcome back, audience. Hope you like that. So that was what you think about the future. Now let's have a chat to our experts about where they see things going. First of all, we're going to look out a little bit over those sort of like 3 or 5 years. Interesting true fact, Blade Runner was set in 2019, so this will take us all the way to Blade Runner. Well, we'll see if it will. So first of all, Chris, when we asked you to pick out something, then we wanted you to pick out software-defined infrastructure. That's what you fixed on, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes. So tell me, why is this an important component of what's going to happen in 5 years from now?
Sure. So this diagram that you're seeing, this is our kind of vision. This is what's steering what we do, what we deliver to the market. And basically, there's 3 things that are important from this picture. The first is, if you look at the bottom of the chart there, we have this concept of resource pools. So we stop thinking about things in terms of servers or storage boxes or network devices, and you start thinking about the resources you have available to you. You've obviously got your applications still, which have requirements on those services, and you need a way to apply those resources depending on what the applications need. And that's where the orchestration layer plays its part in taking those resources and applying them to meet the needs of the application, software defined.
Some of our audience now will be going, yeah, software defined. I'm all over that already.
Okay, good. Well, that's a great start. And I think there's a lot of people who are. There's a lot of people who really aren't there yet. The other thing that's different here is the use of the information that's available in the infrastructure. We refer to it as telemetry often. So like infrastructure attributes, and to give you some examples here, by telemetry, we mean what are the capabilities of your infrastructure and what's its state. And there's some examples here on the screen. You can see, the capabilities of the system might be its performance, its memory capacity, its storage performance, for example, and its state might be what's it doing at the moment. Is it fully utilized? Is it overheating? Is it physically in one country or another? And the idea is that with combining those bits of information, your orchestration tools can make real-time automated decisions about how they apply those resources. And that's not somewhere we think people are today. The use of this data is only really something that you can do fairly recently, although the concept has been there. This data is something that's really starting to be usable today.
So I've heard that comment from customers. I'm already virtualized. Aren't I software defined? Some of my infrastructure is defined in software, therefore by definition I'm software defined. And then it couldn't be further from the truth. What we really mean by software defined is infrastructure defined by software, not infrastructure defined in software. So what we're talking about is how does the infrastructure programmatically react in real time to the changes and the ebbs and flows in workloads. Now to do that, you've actually got to start putting a whole bunch of orchestration automation in. You've got to get an API layer in. You've got to get workloads to start using those APIs to drive infrastructure in real time. That's when you get the elasticity provided by software defined. It's not just about virtualizing. This isn't just an abstraction conversation. It's how do I drive infrastructure in real time? That's a much bigger
help
thing.
it to be responsive based on those needs of the applications.
Yeah.
This isn't just like, we're not dressing up management as in a fancy title, are we, Tony?
Not really, no. When we talked to the register audience and the results we just gave, we said there that while software defined might not be an explicit driver that's really pushing things forward at the moment, it is part of the implicit journey that nearly all of the register audience are on, but at varying levels of it. And so has anybody reached these levels of having complete automation at that policy level, even more than just moving virtual machines around? Nowhere near it yet. It's certainly a goal though that people see the benefits of. But again, the big question is, well, great, but how do I get there from here?
Just give me an example on this one, Chris. What sort of information, telemetry information, will be kicking around in 3 or 5 years that just isn't available now?
So some of the stuff that's really just starting to emerge, for example, multi-tenant environments. If you've got lots of virtual machines sharing an environment, you might get one of them sucking up a lot of performance, taking over the performance, impacting the performance of the other machines on that infrastructure. Today, you can't really do much about that. If you're in IT, a private IT, you can take action by talking to the department in question, making arrangements. If you're in a public environment, you don't know, who that virtual machine belongs to or why it's sucking up the performance. With the data that's coming from telemetry, you can make decisions and take action. When you see that performance hit happening, you can take action that could be maybe migrating that workload away, migrating the other workloads away. And that's something only just you've been able to start doing. The latest generation of platforms that launched introduced that ability to monitor that. So that's fresh off the press. There are a bunch of security related ones as well, which people are only just really starting to use. But those are just a couple of examples.
But that's a big focus on your thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
just...
yeah.
sort of building the stuff and making sure that it can tell you how it feels.
Yeah, it's the intelligence in the platform. How do I make decisions based on what's happening in real time?
I
Absolutely.
can give you some concrete examples why customers aren't there yet, right? Because we are within HP still exploring gaps that we see within the architecture of software defined. So simple things like how do you arbitrate the data center? So if all of these workloads are going to start driving compute and storage and networking, ultimately facilities, power and cooling, and they're all going to be doing it in parallel, who's arbitrating the one that gets to win that discussion? We're really seeing the clear answer of how you arbitrate in that space. Same thing around analytics. You've got now a ton more information and data points. Where's the analytics engine that's pulling all of that together and actually giving you some intelligent insight? So there's still some gaps in there.
Yeah. You've got an awful lot of information that you could be looking at, but the question is, how can you look at it reasonably enough, and how can you do that automatically, which in turn really means you need to have policy on top of that that says, who gets the bigger share of the infrastructure if we do have resource contention, because people don't have infinite resources, never will have.
No. And it's not just resource contention, right? What happens if code goes rogue? What happens if someone put malicious code into my data center? Now all of a sudden it's consumed. How do you respond to that? So it's knowing what good looks like as well as arbitrating.
So you're, as you say, you're the sort of customer voice.
Yeah.
Sort of Craig. So looking at. You described it as sort of like emerging from the ooze. Exactly. I didn't think you said your customers were in the ooze, but other customers are perhaps.
Some of them.
Some of them are.
Absolutely.
And so what's the ooze and what are we emerging from?
So we put this slide up here. We talk about going from a predictive supply model to an elastic supply model. So the elastic supply is software defined. I think if I was going to pick one slide, I probably would have gone with software defined. But and that's really what we mean by software defined. It's a fully elastic supply. It's something that's able to really react in real time. Where are we today? Most customers are managing white space. Honestly, most customers are.
What does that mean?
It means, I'm managing the gap between my total resource commitment and actually the demand. So I can either maintain a huge white space. Problem there is the business will turn around and say, why have you sunk all that investment and I'm not getting that? Exactly. Or some customers are running such a skinny piece of white space that when the business does say I need some sort of change, or they just can't react. The lead time is 3 months. And that's what we mean by predictive supply. People are right into that. What's the right amount of white space for my business? So it's very IT centric. It's very cost centric. And actually where we're trying to get to is to be much more business outcome centric, much more able to sort of think about agility, scalability, and elasticity, that kind of magic word for the future. So that was kind of the headline.
And there's not going to be a single size that fits everybody anyway.
Yeah.
And even if it does fit somebody today, then tomorrow they've probably changed. So
yeah, exactly. And we kind of put a few attributes up of where most customers are today. And honestly, and I've been the customer voice in here, we've honestly got, I know we're talking about 3 to 5 years from now, but we've got customers whose average CPU age is 8 to 10 years, and that's not unusual, right? So customers are really sweating those data center assets. And talking about next 3 to 5 years for some customers is about just coming up to today's generation of what platforms can deliver, honestly speaking. But where we are with most customers are very governance-centric, very siloed in their mentalities. Networking teams, storage teams, compute teams. Heaven forbid the facilities teams is actually brought into that discussion as well. Very friction-loaded, a lot of human middleware, a lot of management used, but used and delivered by the human middleware that brings it all together. That's kind of where most customers are, honestly.
The register audience also tells us that they have not just an average age of 8 years, but they've got platforms that go back and all the way forward. So they've got really new stuff, they've got moderately aged stuff, they've got some really old stuff, and they all keep going and they keep moving them as much as they can.
So where do we see going next few years? So definitely the big conversation with customers is convergence. So actually trying to bring some of those domain assets together to bear on specific workload problems. We get a lot of work with customers helping them take advantage of these highly optimized workload systems. I give the example here of the CS900 for SAP HANA. That's been a major seller, not just for HP, but from the services side, is what you expect a big ISV and a big OEM to come together and actually engineer something that works performantly for that platform. And we get the engineering smarts out of our teams, and we don't rely on the customer to need to put those smarts in. So they get quicker time to value. It's an easier experience. Clearly, if you go beyond that, customers are getting excited about hyperconvergence, and what does that mean? So smaller scale-out boxes, quick assimilation, composition, self-healing, converged management domains.
Well, the hyper means what exactly, just to be clear?
So we're seeing much smaller granularity. When we talk about those big end systems, the CS900, we're talking about multiple rack systems that are dedicated for a specific workload.
Yeah.
Down into hyperconvergence, we're talking about smaller form factors, much more granular, much more fixed ratios, much quicker to sort of scale out. It's just keep plugging in the boxes, keep scaling out. It's a kind of linear scale out model. But great, for specific workloads and I kind of, I would be honest, we work with enterprise customers and the footprint for hyperconvergence hasn't been big in the enterprise space. This has massively dominated the SMB space for sure. But it's about getting, fast assimilation, self-healing, converged management, and actually having a very easy experience to scale out. But we actually think it's going to go beyond that. So we're talking about this 3 to 5 year horizon. We actually think that those ratios, which are kind of fixed and locked into those hyperconverged boxes, will get ultimately freed and disaggregated. And I know it's a term that the industry loves terms, right? But we are talking about moving into an era where it's fully composable, right down to the compute, to the store, to the fabric level, and that you can assimilate those components as you need it in real time, disassimilate them so you can compose, decompose, and every piece of that component that you're plugging in because you need that component to scale in the way
You
that
have
it's
the
tied
optimal,
to something else.
you have the optimal amount of this, that, and that at that moment.
But also in terms of the installation, you install, to Craig's point, you install a tray of new processors because you need more processing capacity.
Right.
You may not need more storage at that time, so you don't install any more storage. Whereas today, with a hyperconverged box or a converged system, the ratios you
It's
say
still a big lump of
they come as a fixed
together.
lump of stuff. Whereas this one, you're breaking it, installing just what you need on the cycles of development for that technology as well. So when the new processing comes out, you can look at that. When the new storage comes out, you can look at that. The two things are not coupled together all the time.
What you have at the moment with hyperconverged, we haven't seen from the register's audience a big take up even in SMB.
That's interesting.
It's not seen a big take up anywhere. It's still relatively new. But what you do have is exactly these fixed ratios. So if you've got workloads that are good for it, and you might have several workloads that fit it, but you'll certainly have some that aren't.
Whenever we have this discussion,
and
we
that's
have
the point.
which
It's about
workloads
which
is
work,
it for?
and that's the idea with the composable stuff, that you can actually put in the components that you need,
At
so
the
that you
ratios
can
you need.
the ratios you need, so that you can fit an ever broader range of workloads, so that you have fewer exceptions that don't fit into the box.
And so how does your composable thing know what's best for the workload that's turning up on it?
So can I just point out the big thing in bold and purple is API. And it comes right back to what Chris was saying right up front, which is, in your question is framed, if you don't mind me saying, in that kind of predictive supply model. How do I predict what my workloads are going to need? How do I, as an IT admin, carve that up for that workload?
Just call me yesterday's man.
No. It's and actually that's still absolutely one pane of glass into that infrastructure. You should still be able to do that. But increasingly, to the software-defined agenda, it will be applications and workloads themselves which are driving the composition of the infrastructure below it.
They know what they want.
They know what they want. They
Even
can
if
express it in policy.
Even if they don't know what they want, the idea is that with all the metrics now, you can run it in an environment, see how it responds, see how much CPU it's taking, how much storage, etc., and then work out dynamically, okay, we need to tweak this and see what comes out. And if you can do that fast enough, you can actually optimize things just using mathematics, never mind using knowledge up front.
Now, you've come up with Project Synergy.
We love a good code name.
I was going to say the future might be better, but it's certainly not going to have less jargon in it, is it?
Should have been Project Blade Runner.
Project Synergy.
Yeah, well, so it's exactly that, actually. It is, if you're going to have an API way into the infrastructure, then it better not just be one ISV's or one OEM's version of that truth, right? Because we all know, we work in customer data centers all over the world. They're multi-vendor by definition. They're not flat by definition. There's mission-critical workloads. There's back office workloads. So these are complex environments. So what we try to launch here, in fact what we have launched and what we have a growing ecosystem around, is how do we get different vendors that are trying to program the infrastructure to try and make it more agile, how do we get them coalesce around an API model which is obviously extensible and interoperable, and that's what Project Synergy is about. So we've announced a whole ton of partners in that program already, and that's got to be the way forward. A composition of different API vendors that have that kind of seamless integration and interoperability.
What was the sort of horizon on this then?
Well, you've already said in the question it's a 3 to 5 years. No. So Martin Fink, our CTO, was talking about composable back in Las Vegas a few months ago. And I expect you'll hear a lot more noise about it at HP Discover right here in London in December as well. So I think next FY16, FY17 from our perspective, you'll start to see this stuff really come to life.
Good.
The big thing here is that, avoiding lock-in is certainly every IT professional's absolute requirement, because when you've got a silo, and you're locked in, and that's the thing that actually delays making decisions more than anything else in IT. Fear of lock-in.
But here's where we go, and here's my favourite bit. I love this slide. And this is it. The machine. Now, is this a proper name for it, or is this just something we came up because we're basically the machine?
Oh no, it's HP's proper name,
isn't it?
Yeah. I think Martin adapted recently memory-driven computing. It morphs and changes. But you did deliberately say 5 years here, so this is an end of decade question, right? So what does the end of the decade look like? What we can say, I think for sure, and however it gets manifest, is what we can say is with the amount of data we're generating now, that there is no chance in hell that existing storage architectures can handle that.
Yeah.
So that we are moving to a massively addressable memory pool of some kind, and whether that's HP's Memristor technology or whether that's resistive RAM or whatever the ultimate storage architecture is, we're moving to a state where we have massively addressable memory. We have to have that. We have to collapse the storage volatility chain. We can't just keep paging stuff in and out all the time. That doesn't work in a digital economy.
One thing I can say about this is architecture's getting a lot simpler the further you go.
and a lot prettier to look at, right?
You can just call this Skynet. Now, on the left-hand side, the special purpose cores, this is more in your area, isn't it?
It is, and I guess if you go back to the idea of this pool of compute, it's tempting to think of that as just a lump of generic compute resource, but when you actually look at the workloads, they all mean different things. To your point about the converged systems, the HANA box obviously needs a lot of memory, so it's based around processes that support a lot of memory, but not all workloads need that. So the idea is you don't just have all cores are equal, you have lots of different products designed for different compute needs, and obviously our job is to make sure we have products that meet all those needs in that workload space.
So it could be a GPU, right?
Could be
CPU.
Very highly parallel, could be very low power, for example, depending on your requirements. Could be accelerators.
Could it be mix and match with some of your stuff and some other people's stuff and things like that?
No reason why it couldn't be, just like today, really. I mean, everything's standards based.
That's really the point here.
That's the key.
These are not, a single special purpose cores. They're multiple purpose cores, and the memory pool as well might not have the same memory all the way through it.
Absolutely.
They can have different components in there doing different things at different times, and it's how you interconnect them all that's really the important part, and control that.
And the interconnect bit is the last piece, right? Which is light, using light to connect this stuff rather than using copper, which has some kind of physical constraints to it. So pretty exciting 5 years out. It's very, very different.
It's fine. So let's have a look. So I mean, what we're going to look at really is how we get from
and in very short, that's the end state that we're trying to help customers get towards. This much more elastic supply, one which is driven by software defined, one which we've abstracted the programmability software logic out of the infrastructure, and we're driving it in real time.
Right. So one of the things that comes up with this is that you guys are saying that this means that there's going to be a different way of spending on IT as well. Tony, this is one that you're always very strong on, the idea that IT is basically the spend, you get budget for projects.
You get budget for projects, it's fixed, so therefore you have to predict up front, which is why there's so much white space out there not being used, while utilisation rates are traditionally quite low. But it's been very rigid. You've got a defined amount of money, and you need that fixed for the year, because that's the way the business budgets for IT. But as you move into these more dynamic environments where things might need to change more quickly, where service requirements can change very quickly because the business itself has to respond to the forces acting on it, much more rapidly than before, you need a different way of funding IT, which means the whole process needs to change.
This is as much of an innovation as actually having these things in photonics.
It's probably a harder innovation because it involves people and lots of internal politics.
So far we've managed to leave the people out of this, haven't we? And in fact we're actively engineering the people out of it, and then
we're moving the people to a different place.
So that's the other thing I want to look at. So it's moving the people back where what this means for the demand on skills and where skills are going to be applied. So that's our next section on this, isn't it? So if we're looking at how infrastructure evolves and how that means that IT is going to function.
Sure. And so there's just a way to sort of illustrate this. If you think about how we see IT operating today on the left-hand side, you tend to have IT focused on, you know, the traditional, the core infrastructure, the things we've always looked at, and then there's users taking services from that group, but they're also consuming services from external providers like, you know, public cloud, because it's quicker, it's perceived to be cheaper, better, and IT often doesn't really have involvement in all of those things.
And I'm going to put John's question to you now. It says, in 5 years' time, isn't this going to be Amazon's problem rather than his? You know, it's like, you know, why do you have to get involved in building this sort of thing when we've got people who do it for us?
Absolutely. So the idea is, in however many years' time, you will all not treat the IT as two separate buckets of resources. You'll have, you know, a set of resources you can consume, and some of that could be Amazon, some of it could be Azure or something else. It could be providers that don't exist today, but some of it we think will still remain being the on-premise, the stuff that you own. And that IT has to span across all of those things. The mix, as you said, Tony, is going to be different, one company to another, but IT has to take a view across all those resources and make sure they do what they do best, which is make sure it's secure, compliant, governed, make sure you're getting good value for money, you know, all those things that IT knows how to do, but traditionally have done on-premise hardware, the core infrastructure.
It's getting the right qualities to deliver the right service at the right time. Some will come internally, some will come externally. So, as was it John said, you know, this is all going to be somebody else's problem. It's not. It's still going to be IT's problem, even if it's somebody else delivering it. You've got to manage it, you've got to govern it, you've got to make sure that the right things go in the right place. But what the register audience have told us, time after time after time, no matter how we've asked the question, is that they really do expect to be running hybrid systems, you know, with some inside, some outside. The ratios between the two will probably change, you know, over time, never mind, you know, different companies, different company.
Yeah.
But the point is that there's still going to be stuff that you are going to run inside and only going to run inside. How you move that around inside in your own infrastructure is one thing, and there'll be other things you're happy to move outside. Maybe some things that you're happy with inside now and move outside later, or vice versa. But it's going to be different, it's going to be dynamic.
I think this is the worry, though. The question that John's asking, this is the worry that is on the lips of every customer I talk to is, you know, is my job getting replaced by the big cloud providers over the next 5 years? And I honestly think it's a much more complicated answer. It comes down to things like data sovereignty. If you're going to operate and succeed in a digital economy, and every industry I talk to is talking about how data is the prized asset going forward and is their ability to differentiate themselves in the market. Well, are you happy putting all of that crown jewels in someone else's data center?
Well, a lot of people say yes, actually, they are.
Yeah, but also then you've got the question of, you're putting it into somebody else's data structure. How do you get it out? If they suddenly tell you, okay, we're going out of business, you know, in a few days' time, we don't want to be in this business anymore, the profit's not there for us, so guys, we're moving off. Yeah. What do you do then? That's why you've got the whole question of how you manage data doesn't go away. Even if you do push everything outside, you've got to be able to bring it back if you need to.
Laws change, it needs to be portable.
But so the jobs that persist, the jobs that will be always with us, the people who do security and governance, they're always going to be around in the IT.
You're trying to come up with a hit list of who's going to be around in the next 5 years.
Basically, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
You're still going to have developers, you're still going to have people responsible for security, you're still going to have people responsible for service management, which is what we are today. It's just that service management is going to be focused more on managing the service rather than managing the infrastructure.
And they'll be managing much more complex supply chains.
Absolutely.
That's the reality.
The true skill is going to be always understanding what the business needs and how best to meet that need. Could be on your premise, could be in the cloud. And but those who understand
that is ready to pay for it.
That specifically, the thing that we were saying based on this is we were looking at this bimodal model here. I said there are still a bunch of people who are going to be in the IT sector who are good for that. What is it? The mode one, the reliability side of the bimodal thing, and don't try and push those into jobs that they're not good.
Yeah, but I don't want it to sound like that's some kind of retrograde or legacy type of job.
I'm making it sound like
it absolutely isn't.
You've heard me say that many times. That, you know, just because you're spending 80% of your budget, you know, keeping the lights on doesn't mean that keeping the lights on isn't a good thing. It's really important, guys, because that's where your money's coming from. But the bimodal goes beyond just this. You know, where do the IT jobs go? It goes into, you know, how is IT going to be used? Are there some things that are relatively fixed and predictable, and some things that are much more dynamic and fluid? Absolutely. And that's really at the heart of it.
Yeah.
So this is the table. Is it this? You drew this one, didn't you?
No, this is actually an analyst table. So it's a Gartner's attributes of bimodal. Exactly. Sorry,
don't pick fights with Gartner.
But actually, what I liked about it, and we mentioned earlier that we weren't bringing the people into the room, but actually, this is all about people and the future. future of IT isn't just these big architectural changes like photonics and that kind of stuff. It is how do you culturally both tap in and mine the digital economy and do it very quickly and with great agility and not be afraid to fail and learn iteratively very quickly. But also how do you absolutely keep that kind of rock solid ability of the data center to deliver availability and scalability, stuff we've been doing for years, right? And the difference here is cultural. It's around talent, it's around sourcing, it's around the values you have in those teams, and so it's very much, we were talking about it earlier, it's very much a people discussion.
And the cultural side is really important because, the mode 2 about, doing things quickly and if they fail, changing them quickly means you've got to be willing to accept failure.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
lots of IT people find it very hard to accept failure because that's not what we've done.
That's right.
But also lots of business people don't like it either. So they've got to realise that there are some things that you can try new stuff for quickly, and if it doesn't work, you change it.
Yeah.
And other stuff you really want to make sure
really
that it works all the time.
Absolutely.
At the Register, we celebrate other people's
Absolutely.
failure, but probably not in the way that you're trying
You're
to
too
frame
far down
this.
the scale.
I wasn't saying celebrating failure. I was saying, accepting it and living with it,
Learning
and
from it.
learning how to live with it, where to live with
as
it.
a serious thing. I mean,
Yeah.
when we do, we had a lot of interest. We haven't covered DevOps nearly enough in my mind, but that culture, the cultural change, cannot be underestimated as a way of supporting our journey from where we are now to where.
Yeah, and we're not setting DevOps as the route to failure. That's not the argument here.
No,
but DevOps is absolutely about a movement of how do you get cycle times much shorter? How do you move progression through the system much quicker? And so that you can get to those points of learning, whether they are failures or whatever you want to call them, but they are points of learning, inflection points that say, okay, now we need to try something else or try a different trajectory. And you need to be able to do that very quickly, which is why I think the DevOps movement is great at trying to solve that kind of, get those cycle times down and get that learning in quickly. You don't want to program that into your mode 1, which is why ITIL governance is still
And
very much...
Getting your governance wrapped around this so that it can cater for much more rapid change is really important, and something that people have struggled with because when we've put in ITIL processes, they've been very rigid, it's almost gone against the philosophy of ITIL, which was doing the right thing for the right reasons.
Right.
And it's become just, a set of processes and tick boxes.
A big book that everyone's got.
And that's why you need different ways of managing different systems, because you've always needed that, but we haven't actually built that into a lot of the governance we put in. We've put one size governance fits everything. It doesn't work.
That's a great point. I've seen customers kind of saying, yes, I'm on the path to ITIL, becoming ITIL certified, but actually what they're using it as a governance model to restrict change in the core, to slow down innovation, to slow down stuff.
Absolutely not what you want in mode 2.
Absolutely, which is not what you want in mode 2, absolutely right,
Because I asked you to come up with some things that people should be doing right now about this. And these things you don't. Yes, we're not. Either don't change or just embrace doing crazy things or anything like that. They're much more specific. APIs. You're back to APIs again. Explain that.
Yeah. Well, so if I look at what my customers are trying to do. Going forward, it seems to me, and I certainly had a number of conversations that have played this out, that they made some decisions, 8 to 10 years ago about how to do some virtualization automation pieces, and they've gotten so far down. In fact, I have customers that are now sort of 95th percentile virtualized. So that game's come and gone. That's been played out over the last 8 years. Now they're into a position where they have a software abstraction layer or virtualization layer, and that looks like that's fit for purpose going forward into the digital economy. But what actually is happening is, without thinking about it, they're buying into an API set that was delivered off the back of a decision made 8 years ago to move into a much more open and interoperable kind of hybrid IT landscape, and so customers are kind of at that tricky decision point. Do they carry on going down that rabbit hole, or do they pause for a second and start thinking more strategically across their teams?
It's yet another example of essentially lock-in.
Yes,
exactly.
But it's lock-in by accident.
Doesn't look like lock-in, does it?
It's lock-in by accident rather than by design. And that's a problem that we often have, not just in IT, but again in business generally, that inertia becomes very, very difficult to change. You need to put a lot of force into it. That's pure physics.
It's path of least resistance stuff.
And that's the stuff that we've really got to get over and find that time to sit back and say, whoa, okay, before we do move any further down the path we're doing it, it might be the right path, it might not be. Let's step back and actually think about it and work it out for real. Work it out intellectually rather than just emotionally, that's what we've done.
That's right. Because here's the reality. You've got a set of APIs in the networking domain, right, delivered by certain vendors in the networking space. You've got customers who bought into certain storage fabrics have got another set of management automation layers with a different set of APIs. You've got different abstraction of compute with another set of management and API layers. Then you've got the facilities guys, and then you try and stitch all that together and say that actually the future is going to be software defined, that the future is going to be driven by software. Well, hang on, how?
Yeah.
How do you aggregate all of that stuff up? So now's the time to actually just step back a little bit and say, what do we
Put the
want?
thing in place that will get us into that, because we're often guilty of telling people to be successful in the future, aren't we? Really, we're always telling people to be agile and stuff like that. Because I'd like to be agile. Tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
And you're saying this is a fundamental.
It's an
part of
inflection
it,
point.
Yeah, and I think the thing you sort of touched on there is that don't get into the silos position where the facilities are doing their thing and IT is doing their thing.
Yeah.
And we had this discussion with a number of people where we look at power consumption, for example,
Yeah.
and a number of IT guys say, I don't care about power consumption, I don't pay the bill. Somebody else pays the bill.
That's it.
You can't have that position in future if you're going to do this properly. The true cost of IT has to encompass power. It has to encompass the public cloud stuff that's being bought by
And to
line of
bring it back
business.
to APIs, so what we've just shown in HP over the last couple of Discovers is the integration of something like a Schneider's StructureWorks, which is a DCIM platform for the facilities side of the house, actually sharing across that API, interconnecting with HP's OneView, which is more on the infrastructure side of the house. And so you've got actually now a sharing of data coming across from facilities to infrastructure. But why is it happening? Because we stepped back and we brought the facilities guys together with the compute storage network and guys, so how are we going to actually start sharing data in this future?
So you've got the APIs, which are part of the same thing. They're another side of that sharing, making sure you share the data.
Yeah.
You also look at data classification, repatriating data. What was your point about that?
It's not just about data classification, it's actually about understanding everything that you've got at the moment. Something that the audience has heard me say time after time after time. But on the data side, most people don't know what data they have, they don't know where it is, they don't know how important it is, what governance restrictions should be wrapped around it, because we've had a lot of things going on that no one's really taken ownership of data. Who should be responsible for data management and data governance really should be the business users themselves. But they tend not to want to do it because, again, they don't know always what you can and can't do with data. But it is really just finding that information and doing some simple classification. Doesn't have to be really complicated, but you've got to start somewhere.
Because that will stand in the way of being able to implement the sort of projects that we're talking about now, because people don't...
If you haven't got the knowledge...
we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, if you haven't got the core information, you can't actually set any policies because you're shooting in the dark.
So why is that a problem? Because currency of the digital economy is data, and all we're going to generate from now onwards is a lot more of it. So, you need to get some of these basic principles in place right now. Otherwise, it's like building a house on quicksand.
Okay, that's great. So that's it. So there's those things that people should be doing now, not straight away now. They've got to stay till the end of the Regcast. We don't have to, but it's good to. And but that's So that's
and simple stuff as well,
Yeah.
right? So let's just remind our audience. modernise. So we're talking about bimodal. It's about the best of Mode 1 and Mode 2. It's not just about investing in some Mode 2 stuff. So get that core digitally renovated, and that means modernising, getting off those 8.5-year-old, 10-year-old platforms, starting to get platforms in place that do match an API standard that you're setting for yourself in a software-defined race. Migrating, getting stuff off closed proprietary legacy stuff that's been sitting in the back of the data center for decades.
Costing a fortune.
And bring it into some industry standard, open standard environment.
You might have some stuff that really does need to run on dedicated equipment, and then fine, you keep it, but you've got to actually make the decision rather than just have it carry on.
Because some of the problems, some of the reasons that this stuff's on the old platforms,
it's because it
no one
works.
wants to touch it.
Yeah.
Because we started off saying, so what should people do today? And we've just given them 18 months of work.
Yeah.
And that's, that is probably, I know we're talking about getting them into the future and everything like that, but there are some bits that it's real, you're saying it's bite the bullet time on some of this stuff.
It is. We have a centre of excellence actually in our consulting business that focuses on nothing other than trying to take code off those systems that have sat there working that nobody wants to touch because nobody understands and nobody's innovating on. It just runs. And how do I get that workload off into something that I can participate in a more open ecosystem? It's tough.
Case in point, right? The Windows Server 2003 end of life. How many customers have we spoken to that said, I'm stuck. I didn't act 4 years ago, 5 years ago when I should have done, and now I'm in a position where I can't get a replacement app. I'm just going to have to keep it running and do what I can and keep my fingers crossed.
We did a webcast
you
on
can't
this
let
a couple of
yourself
months
get into
ago.
that position.
Exactly. We
So-
go for and this is where you need this is one more reason why you need to maintain those mode 1 guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
Yeah,
the
bottom
people
line.
that
But
do the job.
you've got to decide, what is mode 1, what is mode 2, and make some decisions around it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a lot for people to be taking on, but to sum up what we're doing here, there really is got to be a new style of IT as well as a new way of building things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And we put a number of bullets up here that I think is really the trajectory for most of our customers going forward. So, critically, and I know Tony, you got opinions on this as well. It really is about being measured on business outcomes. Perhaps you wanted to add a comment or two.
And that's obviously the really difficult part, because IT really is the business in many organisations, but actually getting that visibility on how different resources are being used to give that business value, that's really important, and getting that seen by the business, because that also frees up the budget to actually do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and you've also got to make a case to the rest of the business that this is how it's going to work, because they're going to come back and say, well, our budget was for buying you this thing. We didn't know it would either be shared or it would be in this common pool, making this big thing called the machine, that sort of thing. All of this will be quite a lot to tell the rest of the business about.
Which actually comes to number 2, which is about becoming much, much more service-centric. So becoming more like a service provider to the business, acting more like some of what they experience when they go out to these cloud providers, that kind of transparency of cost.
But a lot of the guys actually realise that's what they've got to do anyway, and they're down that path, but it's how do you report on that, get the visibility so that everybody can see how this is working in reality.
And people aren't used to getting that from IT, right? They're used to getting it from wherever they get it from as a consumer, but maybe not from IT. So
Yeah, and the final thing I want to say about this, you've got to find an actual way to explain elastic supply to people in a way that makes sense. Some people might be thinking, I thought that's what we were getting anyway, because the idea,
IT is just that thing
because
that
it just
happens.
works. Think about it,
Right?
And to say that we have to make all these fundamental changes to what's been done to get a thing that maybe they thought they were having. Well, that's going to take a little
And
bit.
finding that time to step back so that you know what you do need to keep as the predictive, the well-governance, and everything else being on the elastic side.
So now, in terms of a business model, one thing that you guys, I think no, it's not the last complicated slide. Of course, it's not. Who have I got in front of me? Now, on this, the broker business model. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I mean, it's inevitably where the pressure is coming from for our customers. It is IT having to step up and become part of a value-based approach to IT service delivery, and it's acknowledging that they play a role. As opposed to in the past, we've played the role for the business. Now it's about actually understanding there's a marketplace out there. There are providers that can provide services which might, with the right regulation, the right governance, the right security, right reporting, etc., play more of a value role in your IT supply chain. And actually that's the right thing to do sometimes. So it's about understanding your role needs to become the broker to bring all of those different elements together and not just have the business go out to the shadow IT thing, which we see too often.
Tangible example, right? Our CIO has been out and said, we have 2,000 apps at Intel, 2,000 public cloud services being used. And IT did not provision or recommend those apps. People just went out and used them because they, for whatever reason, weren't getting the service they needed. Now, IT's decision has not been to say, no, you mustn't do that, we're going to stop and prevent that. It's actually, let's go look at them, let's classify them, let's make sure that when there's an enterprise version that's more secure or with higher SLAs, we're using that one. Let's make sure we're getting volume pricing if there's lots of us using this. At the moment, it's individual people. Let's wrap IT's goodness around that. Embrace it, but make sure it's done properly. That's the example. Don't fight it.
You process guys break the rules a bit as well.
It's human nature, isn't it, to just go with the path of least resistance.
Again, the tricky part here is actually getting that visibility. How do we know what's going on? How can we see what's going on? And making sure we've got the right policies in place to say, hey, look, guys, you've done that, but maybe you shouldn't have. Or
let me help you do it better.
That's the thing. It's really getting that visibility and control and getting the understanding on the customer side as well, so that everybody knows what's going on and why some things can happen, others can't.
Actually, just on that, give a data point. So one of the fastest growing areas of interest from our services portfolio has been shadow IT discovery.
Right.
And that's been about putting probes on the edge of customers' environments and seeing what is it that's coming in and out, and actually giving IT, sometimes for the first time, visibility of what's really being consumed by the business.
So is this kind of like, it can also be almost be a sort of a training into what the future is going to look like once you do this. It's like a first step towards this.
It's probably quite eye-opening for people, I would imagine, to see
is.
how much, you probably have a perception of how much is being used, but actually when you find a way to audit it, wow, it's more than we thought.
The register audience have told us that they know that some things are going on that they are unaware of, but
absolutely.
give us some visibility, help us understand what's going on, and also help us educate the business about, okay, look, you've been doing that, but you really shouldn't have.
Here's why you shouldn't.
And
here's the alternative.
And it could be security, it could be economics.
Yeah.
We've got 3 people doing the same thing, it's costing us more.
But to your point, right, it can't just be a no, you can't do it. It's okay, now I acknowledge that's the feature set you're after. How do I give you that feature set?
We understand why you need this. Let us do it in a better way, a secure
did you
way,
know
a
that we're
faster
actually
way.
doing this already, guys?
Absolutely.
Well, it's kind of like, that's present though. I want to talk about let's focus on the future just right at the end. From this one, this is yours, isn't it, Chris?
Sure.
Where Intel sees where you're going in the future.
Yeah. So if you take back the picture of SDI, software-defined infrastructure, where we're investing, there's some key areas. Compute, we talked about, is not one size fits all. So how do we make sure we have the right suite of processing engines to support the workloads customers need? So that's clearly a fundamental. Secondly is storage, and we've talked a little bit about that with respect to the machine and these massive memory pools. If you look back a couple of weeks ago, we announced the next generation of our SSD and NVM technology, 1,000 times faster than today's SSDs. These are pretty game-changing advances, and you have to have them if that storage picture is going to come to life. So storage is another area we're spending a lot of time on. And finally, network and interconnect. Clearly, we've talked about that. You've got to tie it all together. Today, it's Ethernet. Tomorrow, it's photonics. How do we bring those to customers? How do we support, open network platforms for things like SDN, NFV? So, at platform level, those are the things we're looking at, as well as I talked about earlier, exposing the telemetry in those platforms, sharing the intelligence that's in them, so that the management tools can actually act on the information. So that's probably the
really important point here is that whole orchestration layer again, so that you can actually exploit what's underneath here effectively and efficiently.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And yours, Craig?
Well, finally, it might seem like a bit of a soft, woolly marketing slide, but actually, I think most of our customers, honestly, are after give me the 4 things I should focus on. So how do I break this thing up? How do I carve up this journey into things that I can actually manage? And so there's a whole element around productivity and enabling the workforce in new ways in this much more mobile, consumer-centric landscape. There's definitely a piece of work around that. There's absolutely, number one conversation with customers at the moment is how do I better use code and analytics to give me competitive differentiation? So the whole analytics space, the whole data-driven enterprise space is huge. Certainly in and around security, we always tend to think of protection and assurance and security as that thing that happens afterwards, but it's absolutely vital that if data is the currency of the future, how do I protect it? How do I secure it? How do I make sure that it's my competitive differentiation and not my competitions? And then this whole elastic conversation about how do you become a hybrid player, how do you become a service broker? So those are our 4 pointers, and actually HP is gearing its entire organization in and around those 4 areas. So I think that's a blueprint for customers to think about.
So if this, our 5-year plan, if that doesn't happen, then you're not going to be around anyway. So
in 5 years' time, you better have thought about each of those 4 areas and done something about it.
The thing is that you've really got to make sure that you know what's going on. So get that visibility. As a broker, you need to know everything and making sure that everyone understands it.
Yeah.
Great. All right, good advice, guys. We're out of time now. So thank you very much for watching our RegCast today. There's further reading for you as well if you want some more of this. There's quite a lot to think about, really, so I would really recommend a further reading for this one. Thank you to the guys today.
Yep.
Thank you for having us.
Like they say in the advert, go out and rule the world. And Doc Lord, thank you for this.
My pleasure. It's expect the unexpected.
Expect the unexpected. Well, I mean, if you could, it wouldn't be unexpected, would it? Anyway, so my name's been Tim Phillips, and from the Register, goodbye.